Yeah,
Right.
I think we can. I think we can start. I'm just gonna introduce you quickly. Hello, everyone who's attending. People are gonna be joining as we start on. This on my left, I don't know where you see him, is Mr. Peter Weber, a British director, editor, a producer, a very famous and successful and talented one. And we're very, very happy that he took the time to be participating at our festival this year and to give a masterclass for all of us. And we're really, really excited about that. Peter, thank you for being here. And thank you.
My pleasure. It's a pity I can't be there in person, but maybe this time next year, I can, come over and meet all you guys. And just thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you so much for screening my films as well. It's a great privilege and an honor. Thank you.
So we had already a couple of questions from a couple of attendees who are here and who are joining that I wanted to pose in advance, and then we can pick up from there.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go chronologically. So Angela Jurashkovic from the company Eco Korean, which means Eco Ruth. She's an environmental business.
Yeah.
Is asking, how does a filmmaker address the fear of presenting an environmental issue in a one-sided way?
There is. I've made this environmentally themed documentary. Well, I've made a couple really, but the one that is most hard-hitting, let's say, is 10 billion, and it is very, very difficult because there's a lot of discourse around this that you shouldn't scare people, because if you scare people, then you make them shut down. And actually, that was advice that I ignored completely. And I think it's one of the it's not a soft-edged thing at all. It's very, very hard-hitting. We took the work of this guy, Stephen Emmett, who is quite a pessimist and quite aggressive in his pessimism. I don't necessarily share all of his views, but it was my job to put his views up on the screen. But that film was made about, I don't know, it's over 5 years old. Since then, things have changed a bit, because I think with someone like Greta Thunberg, let's say, coming along, it means that, this as a subject matter has gone into, a lot more people are aware of it. It's gone into a lot more homes, and she is quite punchy and quite hard-hitting as well. And as she says, when, if your house is burning down, you've got to wake people up and get them out the door. And and part of me wonders whether there's not an effort by the forces of disinformation and climate deniers to make us, people who are concerned about ecological themes, make us shut up a bit. But it is very tricky, because fear is not a great motivator. And there's a great Gramsci quote. He talks about pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. And I think that shows the kind of balance that you have to strike. I don't think I found it in the film that I made. I think there are some flaws in that, but I think you have to try and find a way to let people understand intellectually exactly how difficult this position is, but also find a way to empower them and make them feel like there is at least some hope, because otherwise we might all give up. And I think that's why filmmaking is so important, storytelling is so important, and putting things into context. Because, for example, with COVID is not just this random thing. COVID is very much to do with globalization and to do with the ecological problems that are beginning to affect us as a whole. It's like an advanced rider of the horsemen of the apocalypse. And the more we can put things into context and help people understand and educate them, the better. Having said that, part of me thinks that people really do need to be frightened there to wake them up a bit, because it's so easy just to carry on and not change our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. And there is another great and quite provocative but very analytical question in regards to what you just said, and I'm gonna ask you from Balša Lubarda, one of our participants. But before I do that, I'm just gonna tell the attendees that if you have any questions that you want spontaneously to ask, you can write them in the chat room, and I will, throughout the masterclass, read them for you. So Balša is asking, Don't you find the logic implied by the very title of your film somewhat misleading? The overpopulation argument seems to be portraying misanthropic sentiment, which quite often brings about technocratic solutions to the problem of excessive consumerism. The author of the book, Mr. Ahmed, has been accused of, again implicitly, endorsing ecofascism by the very choice of this logic. Have you ever felt personally uneasy about this title?
I don't feel uneasy about the title. There's I don't share 100% of his. Well, let's say that. I mean, I share a lot of his views, but let's say some of the stresses. And if you look at the film, you compare it to the book, you will see that I used it as a platform with which to investigate many other areas in more detail than overpopulation. There is a very troubling discourse around overpopulation because the truth of it is that it's to do with resource consumption, okay? And so that means, to pick on our friends in the USA, that Americans are much worse for the planet than someone who comes from Mali, for example, or most African countries, because their carbon footprint is that much larger and their resource consumption is that much larger. So there's not a strict correlation, if you like, between population and the kind of damage that is being wrought. But I think the thing is, it's very easy to pick holes and to slice and dice and to be worried about technocratic solutions and the rest of it. All of this is fine and well, but we are living in a world where we are not doing enough, where we're still fossil fuel based, where there are still a lot of climate deniers, where fossil fuel companies are getting government subsidies and are perverting, let's say perverting democracy in some way because they're such wealthy companies. So I think that to be too inward looking and to be worried about these things, well, I'm not saying you're not justified in asking this question, but I think, frankly, the survival of the human race is at stake. And therefore, we should be putting our energies outwards into trying to come up with solutions and also to promote debate. I'm not saying that what we say in that film is 100% correct. It's a point of view, it's Stephen's point of view. I disagree with some of it, but the more we get this stuff out there and the more people make a noise, the more likely we are to begin slowly to change things so that we have a fighting chance at surviving. And I do think it's an existential question.
Thank you. I hope Balsha, I think Balsha's here. Balsha, if you want to add additional notes and questions, please do write them. So the next question we have from Kristina Žukić from the NGO Ecologic. She's asking, do you still mean that we are hopeless, like you said at the end of your movie? Well,
I didn't say that. Stephen said that. And, you know, I was able to make the movie because of his book and because of the impact it had with the theatre piece and the work that he was doing. And although I agree with 90% of it, I think that there are some things in there that I personally don't agree with. Now, I was able to, you know, change some things and change some emphases, but at the end of the day, it's his message, and it was my job as a filmmaker to promote his message, and that is how he feels. And I thought it was interesting to put that out in the public realm because I think there's too much soft pedaling there. I think there is room for a more hard-hitting and aggressive message. And I think it's important philosophically that even if we personally and privately think that things might be hopeless, that we carry on, you know, that we do what we can, because it's not so much about our generation, but about generations to come. So if I was to make that film again, or if I was to make a film that purely represented my point of view, my stresses would be different. As I said, I do think having people like Greta Thunberg, having Extinction Rebellion, so on and so forth, shows that things are beginning to change. And you know, it's very, very complex, but the more people that join us trying to get this message out into the public, the better. And one thing I want to say, one of the reasons that I did the film After Earth, One Amazing Day was as a counterbalance to the pessimism, because what Earth, One Amazing Day does, it's a family movie, and with the team of filmmakers I was working with, we were trying to show what it is we're trying to say, right? So having done a very, I think, negative message, there's something with a very positive message. So between the two, I think you can see the two sides. One is a warning about what we might lose, and the other is like an inspirational film about the beauty of what we have. So there's two very different approaches there.
We have a question from one of our, we have a couple of really young participants who were participating in our educational programs that we have throughout the year of the festival, and for high school students and kids. And one of them, Mitana Vukcevic, has asked you, have you ever worked with kids? And if yes, can you tell us about your experience?
Yes, I have. I mean, for example, on Hannibal Rising, the first 20, 25 minutes of that film is with an 8-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. And I've worked throughout my career with child performers. I mean, even Scarlett Johansson was only 17 years old when I was working with her. So legally, in some countries, she's still a child. But let's say when actors are below a certain age, there are some who actually do have some craft and are very are kind of advanced beyond their years, let's say. But there are others, like for example the little Czech girl that we used in Hannibal Rising, who just react naturally. And the thing about children is that they, in some way, especially when they're playing, they live in this imaginative world. They live in a fantasy world, in a play world. So it can be easier for them sometimes to access that, or as easy as it is for an adult who has to approach it maybe in a slightly more rational, slightly more intellectual way. It's fascinating. There's an old English saying, I don't know whether you have it, in Montenegro, never work with children and animals, they say.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, but I mean, you know, the reason for that is because you have a schedule, you have to finish at the same time, and you can't control them in the same way that you control adults, let's say. But sometimes you get you get fantastic results that you wouldn't otherwise get. So, I mean, I just watched recently this Spanish film called Cría Cuervos, which has a fantastic performance from, I think she's like an 8 or 9-year-old Spanish girl, and this is a film from the 70s, and there can be something so fresh and interesting that it can definitely be worth the risk.
You mentioned Girl with the Pearl Earring, which is one of the films that I think you're mostly known for. And there is a question, it's posted in Montenegro, but I'm going to try to interpret it because it's kind of multi-layered and long. So the Wildwood Flower, that's the name of the account, is asking, why is the girl with the pearl earring I guess so sexualized as like a character, and was that something that you as a director decided to go for that kind of a style, or was that necessary? That's basically the question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know that I would completely agree. I think that is romantically themed, and I think it is sexually themed, yes, because it's about the if you like, the awakening of a young and naive girl who goes from leaves her family home and goes into this like complicated environment and interacts with this older man. So there is, and these were themes that were in the book, and there is something about when there's one thing about reading it, but when you actually see it. So for example, there is a scene where he pierces her ear, and it's, the thing is, the very context and nature of the story means that it works as some kind of a sexual metaphor, So that is, I think that's implicit in the material, I would say. Now, the interesting thing about it is I don't think it is explicit, though. I think a child can watch that film and it had an open certificate, so anyone could go and see it when it was released in the UK, because there's no bad language in it, there's no nakedness in it. The most that you see is a headscarf gets taken off and some hair is revealed. You see a snatch of an amorous encounter between Scarlett and the butcher at some point later on. But for the most part, it's incredibly restrained. And as a result, the film has screened in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in countries where which are, let's say, where the sexual mores are very different to Western Europe, much more restrictive. So I think you see in there what you want to see in there. It's done with some restraint, but many people find that painting has got that an essence of that, and in a way, I think what the film does is it tries to replicate Vermeer's gaze. It's from the point of view of a young woman, but it is no doubt, as a, you know, I'm a male director. The book might have been written by a woman, but it's about a male artist. So these elements are going to be part of that. But a lot of it is in your head, I would say. It's, you know, it's not really one of the least explicit films ever, and sometimes that restraint can make something more erotically charged.
Yeah. So Balsha actually wrote in the chat as a comment, many thanks for the answer, Peter, and all these clarifications. I have to disclose, I was actually quite triggered, perhaps a bit too much, with the screening of the film with such a title. However, having watched the film, I understood it is not as heavy on the overpopulation aspect, but its title nevertheless hijacks the content. This is a major framing issue, as I am afraid that a lot of very useful and urgent messages your film makes becomes downplayed by this rather dangerous discourse the title implicitly activates.
Well, listen, I accept some of that criticism, and don't think that we didn't discuss it at great length with Stephen. But at the end of the day, it's his book, it's his message, and thank you very much for your comments. It's good to hear someone who takes his subject so seriously and is so thoughtful about it.
Yes, this is really great. Well done, Balsha.
Yeah, thank you, Balsha.
So we have more questions. We have a question from another young student. Actually, there's two questions. Vuk Pulajic is his name. He asked, would you consider Montenegro as a location for filming in future? And would you like to collaborate with some of our actors maybe one day?
Yes, of course. I mean, listen, I have traveled fairly extensively in the, let's say in Central and Eastern Europe. I've been to, film festivals in Croatia, in Georgia, in where else? In Odessa, of course, so on and so forth. So, and in Bucharest, and it's an area of the world that I really like. My family on my father's side all come from Eastern Europe. My grandmother's family were Romanian and my grandfather's family were Belarusian. So maybe there's some, I don't know, genetic kind of connection to that part of the world. And as I was saying to you earlier on, I hope to come to Montenegro in person. I'm always on the lookout for good locations, and I'm always open to working with local talent. I mean, a couple of years ago, I made a film for Netflix in Spanish called Pickpockets. And when I was there, I mean, apart from myself, the lead actor, who was Spanish, and one of the producers was French. Everyone else, well, we used all local crew, all local talent amazing. As well. You know, so I'm a big fan of being able to kind of introduce local talent to a wider audience. So yes, why not? You know, I hope to be there next year and meet some of you. We're
looking forward to that. Dunja Sekulic is asking, what kind of advice would you give a high school student that would like to pursue filmmaking as their profession?
Okay. Well, listen, I'm not encouraging you to skip school, but what I did when I was 15 years old, you know, there was, and this is a long time ago, and it was very difficult to get to see foreign films and old films in those days. You know, there was a little bit on TV, but it was before VHS, if you can believe that. That's how old I am. It was certainly before DVD. And so what I did once I discovered this local repertory cinema, which would show old movies and everything, is I would go there as often as possible. And quite often, instead of going to do sports, what I would do is, instead of taking the bus to the playing fields, I would take another bus and I would go up to the cinema and sit in there all afternoon. I think the more that you acquaint yourself with film history, okay, watch old films, find out about the French New Wave, find out about German Expressionism, find out about American film noir, just fill your head, watch some things like Mark Cousins' History of Film, which takes you through cinema history. Understand where it started with the Lumiere brothers and Méliès and the French, and understand how it developed through silent cinema, and then into the early talkies, understand the difference between Hollywood and the Hong Kong, you know, the films they make in Hong Kong, you know, understand the kind of the wide range of languages, both cinematic and literal, that you have. The more that you fill your head with this and you learn from the masters and you discover who your favorite directors are, you know, then I think the more you're preparing yourself. And on top of that, it's not just about film, because you don't want to be one of those filmmakers who only makes films about films, you know. What you need to do is, I think you need to understand history, you need to understand art, you need to understand theatre, you need to understand politics. There's a fantastic lecture that I would point you to. You can find it on the internet, the text, by Elia Kazan, who made On the Waterfront. And it was his commencement address to the Wesleyan Ladies College in 1968. And he talks about all the things you have to do to turn yourself into a director. It's an amazing piece of writing. I can give you the link to this later on, so you can put it up on the website or something. And if you read that, you will understand that every single day you can work in a way that will make you a better director, that has nothing to do with lenses or cameras or lights or montage or any of the technical stuff. That stuff is important, but the most important thing is developing your sensibility, having a point of view, being an open person who understands and has opinions about culture, about art, about life, being a psychologist. I could go on and on, but you know, studying people. It's like anytime you're in public, you see you're in a cafe, you should be studying the people. And you know, anytime you're in a situation, you should never ever be bored, because you can always be thinking about how people are interacting. You can always be studying the way they move, the way they talk. All of these things, you need a wide range of talents to be a good director. It's very difficult to be a great director. I've been trying all my life. I still haven't got there yet, but I hope to be one day. But you know, even to be a good director, thank you. But even to be a good director, you have to work on so many different elements, and you can do that every single day. Seriously, you know, by looking at a book of paintings, you can understand composition, you can understand lighting, so on and so forth. I could go on for much longer. When I come to Montenegro, then you know, I can meet you, and then I can, you know, or I'll do a day of my workshop, which I do a 2 and 3 day workshop sometimes. And this is the first morning is not really talking about film at all. It's talking about how you educate yourself, and you can then turn yourself into the kind of person who has something to say and has a vision and has stories to tell.
Georgi Mikovic is asking, can you share a bit about your experience working with different cinematographers on your films?
Yes, I can. I mean, listen, I always used to think, when I first started, I used to think, you have to get the best person possible. And I made I made one big mistake. I'm not going to name names. In the very early days, work that's not that famous, when I was working in English TV before I started, because I really liked someone's showreel. But, you know, it has to be not only about how technically good they are. If you're doing fiction, okay, especially, and if you're doing long form, it's different. If you're doing a short film and you're shooting it in a week, then there may be a different thing. But if you're going to be working with someone for 4, 5, 6, 10 weeks, you know, you need someone who shares your vision. You need someone who understands what it is you want and isn't just doing their own thing or doing something for their show reel. You know, the personality of a cinematographer can be as important as their technical skill. So you need someone who's going to be part of your team and someone who will support your vision. And that is much more important than I ever realized. And then for the rest of it, for me, it's about communication. They have to understand the kind of story I want to tell. They have to understand the genre. I will show them, I mean, I'm very big on going back to the history of art, not only in a painting themed picture like Pearl Earring, but with others. So I often show people paintings with certain lighting styles. I show them photographs. I show them certain movies, which are my favorite movies, and movies that deal with things, you know, let's say technically in terms of the lighting, in the way that I'd like to approach stuff. So the more you can communicate with them and give them your vision, the better. This doesn't mean you have to tell them how to light. You can be Stanley Kubrick if you have that talent. You can say, I want the key light here. I want the full light here. I want to do it with this. I want to do it with that. By all means, do that. But what I try and do is more try and paint a picture through images and through words of the kind of film I want to make, communicate that, and then get them to use their creativity and their strengths to help me. Sometimes I'm very specific about lighting, but at other times it's more about helping them understand the kind of world I want to create and being collaborative, you know. Don't feel that I mean, Stanley Kubrick famously knew more about everyone's job than they did, but not every director has to be like that, you know. And I think what it's about is more, you need to get the best work out of people possible. You need to choose the best collaborators, and sometimes you don't need the best lighting cameraman in your country, because maybe they have such an ego they're not going to listen to you. Maybe you get the second best who listens to you, and you create a really good team that creates an environment where great work can be done, okay? And it depends on your personality. You know, what do you like? Are you a team builder or are you an autocrat? And there is room for all kinds of approaches, but the most important thing is, I think, is that you get everyone moving in the same direction, and you let people into your vision of what it is you're trying to create and the story world you're trying to create.
What was now a question for me, because we're out of questions. So if you guys want to ask any questions, you can write them in the chat. As a director, when you're deciding what kind of film are you going to make or what kind of story intrigues you, when you compare yourself at the beginning of your career and now, what are like the most important lessons that you took along the way that really affected you to become a filmmaker that you are right now?
That's a complicated question. I'm trying to think about an interesting answer that won't be, no, it's fine, that won't be too navel gazing. You see, the thing I find is that I don't believe in astrology, okay? But having said that, I am a typical Gemini. So I go from one extreme to another. So for example, in terms of the ecologically themed things I made one film which had a really tough message, and was I don't think that it's, you know, misanthropic, but it's certainly let's say very hard-hitting and quite aggressive in the way that it puts forward its thesis, and then instantly went to make something which was very, very soft-edged and much more inspirational. So I find I move from one thing to another. Once I've investigated one area, I kind of get a bit bored with it and I move on. I mean, often, you know, some people say that, let's say with narrative cinema, that you have two different kinds of directors. You have Hitchcock, who basically made the same film again and again, same kind of themes, different iterations, yes, of the same thing. Or you have Howard Hawks, who made very different genres, very, very different stuff, and is maybe united by some, you know, some thematic things, but in terms of genres and in terms of the you know, stylistic stuff was very, very different. So I don't have like a set of criteria that I impose on something. What I do find though is that the project I've done beforehand is always very different to the one I do afterwards. I'm interested by all by all manner of things. I love history, but I'm also interested in the current day. Recently, what I've been finding is that the things that I became passionate about when I was a teenager, because that's the first time I encountered culture, you know, the first time I became excited about stuff, or even when I was a kid. So I went to see an exhibition about Tutankhamun when I was 10 years old in London. And I was fascinated for a while when I was a kid about ancient Egypt. And so then 30 years later or something, I ended up making a TV series about it, you know, simply because it gave me the opportunity to reconstruct Tutankhamun's tomb in reality, in 3D, and shoot in there. And that was enough, you know, like the reggae documentary I made recently in the yard. Yeah. I fell in love with reggae music when I was 15 years old. I think there's a, you know, and then getting a chance to work with some of these musicians I listened to when I was that age was incredible. There's a purity and a strength to when you first fall in love with things, when you first fall in love with culture, with art, with music, you know, whatever it might be, that as I have got older, I use it to kind of, you know, this can be a tricky business. It can be the business side of it is very harsh. It's very insecure. You can become, as a middle-aged man, quite cynical if you're not careful. And so one of the things that I find is by going back to your youthful enthusiasms, if you like, that wipes all of that away, and it puts you in, you know, and I quite like going back to the purity of my teenage loves, if you like.
Do you when you look at the things that you're doing right now, the topics that you're doing right now, you mentioned that you're all the time changing and different things do inspire you. Is it a conscious decision of yours when you feel that you made, for example, a heavy drama, that you need to get it into a comedy next, or into something that's lighter, for you as a creator to kind of just rest your mind or change your kind of creative force into a different direction?
I think it just happens, if you like. It happens naturally. I've noticed it now. I look back and I see, right, going from one thing to another. You can see it in going from, I mean, some people say from the sublime to the ridiculous, going from Pearl Earring to Hannibal Rising, you know, very, very, very different. I didn't want to get, you know, I had offers to do other films after I did Pearl Earring that were very similar, period romances and the rest of it. And I just wasn't interested in this thing of trying to make the same thing again and again. And, you know, your interests change over the years, I suppose. I guess one of the things I'm interested in doing is just trying to make a film in as many different genres as I can. Maybe it's searching to find a genre where it suddenly, you know, something clicks and I can do a great piece of work. Yeah. So, and also there's a challenge. What happened to me when I was in TV? I made a series of documentaries before I made Pearl Earring that were popular science documentaries. And after I'd done 3 of them, when I got into the 4th one, I realized I was repeating myself and that I was starting to bore myself. And that's the worst thing. I saw an interview with David Bowie recently where he was saying that for any artist, creative person, the most important thing is that you never feel comfortable. You always feel a little bit out of your depth, because that's where something interesting happens. So, you know, that was one of the things about going and making a film in Spanish, making a film in a foreign language. You know, you're not as relaxed as you would be in your own language.
It's
so
a new
moving
challenge,
around, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, having those challenges stop you just dialing it in, you know, sitting there staring at your monitor, and it's very important that you stay as alive and engaged as possible, I think.
Because you're not just a director, you're a producer and an editor. How does your editing vision and style affect your directing? And how do you differentiate what kind of project you want to stand behind as a producer and not direct maybe, and which ones do you want to direct and produce?
The thing is, I started as an editor, and I was an editor for 5, 6, 7 years, and that's really where a couple of things happened there. One is that I learned an awful lot about how you work with sound and images and put them together and how you tell stories. I also worked with a lot of different directors, so I was able to learn a lot about different shooting styles, different styles of personality, different ways of approaching material. But also, funnily enough, because when I started, I wasn't that, I mean, I've changed a lot, but I was really not that confident about my own abilities. And I was very, you know, I was insecure really about whether I had the talent to be a director, even though I wanted to be one. But one of the things that I discovered was through editing is I worked with some directors who were fantastic and taught me a lot. I also worked with some directors who weren't so good, to be honest, naming no names. And it was working with the less good people that made me realize, well, okay, I know I'm not as talented as Antonioni or Godard or any of my heroes, but I don't have to be, because there's plenty of other people out there who are directing who aren't that great either. And that gave me permission, if you like, to go off and do that, rather than thinking I had to measure myself against the greats. What I then had to do after spending all that time editing, you know, I'd soaked up an awful lot about film language. and I was very strong in the cutting room, I would then have to learn about how to work things on set. But I had to give up micromanaging the edit, because when I first started directing, I used to sit in there. I must have driven my editors mad, you know,
Probably,
like
yeah.
literally calling out cut, cut, cut. But I had to learn to, and it took me a while, I admit, and sorry to some of my editors at the time for giving me a hard time. But I then learned how it's important to distance yourself sometimes. Sometimes it's not good to be in the cutting room every single day. It's best to go in, give some notes, go away, let the editors do their work, and keep a little bit of creative different distance, because then you've got more to offer. So nowadays, I don't spend as much time in the cutting room. Sometimes, obviously, there are times when you need to really, you know, there's a scene that's not working, or there's a sequence you really want to craft, and you're in there doing very detailed work. Sometimes you just give notes and you go away. I've done enough producing to realize it's not my favorite thing. You know, I am producing some stuff at the moment. It's, for me, a lot harder work than directing. You know, a lot of what producing is about, there is a creative side to it, but there's also a business side, and there's a money raising side. Yeah. You know, I mean, Orson Welles very famously said that he'd spent, you know, I mean, however many years, you know, 50 years as a director, but 45 of those were raising money. And it can be dispiriting, and it's a very slow process and everything. So, you know, for me, the ideal is to be directing. But you do understand, if you do some editing, if you do some producing, you understand more about the whole process. And I think it makes you a better director at the end of the day.
We started a conversation with the environmental questions, and as we are going towards the end, I would like also to go back a little bit and talk about the connection between film and the environment, and how actually film as such a powerful tool of influence is important to not just, you know, educate people and raise awareness, but also you can be creatively free through that and also do some good to a wider population and mass. How do you feel about, I mean, are you planning to do any more documentaries that are environmentally themed? And And
so okay, let me answer that, then you can ask the next question. At the moment, there's one documentary that I am working on, actually as a producer and a director, which it's a project called Time of Monsters, which I'm doing with Kat Villiers is my main collaborator on that as a producer, some other people as well. Kat has worked with a lot of directors in the former Yugoslavia, and was the producer of Denis Tanovic's No Man's Land, of his Golden Globe winning film. And what we're doing is we're working with a series of directors from around the world, you know, very ethnically diverse, gender diverse, and and that is like a portmanteau film, a series of short films that will look specifically at some ecological issues around the world. Not only ecological, though, we're very interested in the way that society is changing as well, and tying these things together. So it's and they're very personal films. You know, they're going to be like 10-minute long films, so, you know, with some quite well-known directors. So in the midst of that, I will direct one of those, but I'm also helping produce it. And then there's another film I'm working on with an NGO in Colombia called Gaia Amazonas, and Pacho van Hildebrand runs it. And I spent some time in the Amazon just before lockdown. I went there to do some research, and they're doing very, very interesting work about trying to preserve the Amazon, and in particular about the weather systems that preserving a big swathe of forest will help to conserve, because obviously deforestation there is a big problem. It's fascinating, the work that his organization are doing. So I'm working on that, and once I can travel again, and you know, hopefully the world opens up a bit, I'll get back into that, and we'll start looking for some funding. So yeah, it remains a constant theme, definitely.
Have you felt in communicating with your audiences once, you know, your documentaries about environment were out and were shown, that there was like a direct impact? Was the audience really? It's
difficult to know. I mean, I've been to a fair few screenings of 10 billion, And I do. It's interesting that, you know, the question beforehand about finding the title very triggering. Some people find that film quite triggering, not always in a positive way, because of the pessimism in there. And I have taken that. I've taken that on board. So you have to be careful. You can affect people negatively as well as positively. You know, with Earth One Amazing Day, which is a much softer thing, a family film, doesn't mention until very briefly at the end ecology at all. It uses a lot of footage from those amazing BBC documentaries, Living Planet and everything. I mean, we managed to get, at one point that was in 5,000 cinemas around China. So I'm hoping that that kind of thing does get into people's heads and make people realize how important what it is we're trying to preserve, and tries to inspire them. But, you know, it's, the more we can help spark a conversation, the better. I don't know whether a single film is ever really going to make a difference, you know, but maybe if people they're reading about it in the papers, they see some documentaries, some of these themes end up in fiction as well. Maybe bit by bit, people will change. I think one of the challenges, though, is that the kind of people who go to see eco-themed documentaries are those who are already converted to the cause. As we say in English, you're preaching to the choir, you know? And that's the biggest problem. How do you break out of that ghetto? Because you're just telling people who are already converted what they want to hear. And I think the biggest challenge really is to make something where you can introduce an eco theme, but maybe you camouflage it. That's why fiction can be very interesting, because you can, you know, what we need to do is change the minds of the people who don't agree with us. Yeah,
exactly.
The people who think I can do what I want, and who cares about the next generation, who cares about the planet, or actually denies climate change. And that's a much more tricky thing, and it needs a lot more conversation between us all as filmmakers, as film goers, as well as an audience, to understand how to break through and because people are very resistant, because it means you have to change your lifestyle, and it's very. It's a big ask, you know.
It's either radical or nothing, and
exactly. And this eco-fascism thing, which was raised, I can see it's a problem. And also, you know, you have to be careful as a Western European. Now, maybe Western Europe, we're not quite as bad as they are in America, but we are very entitled, and we already have had the benefits of using fossil fuel for 100 years plus, and we've already lifted our society up. So to then say to India, to China, or to less developed nations elsewhere, you have to stop, is morally very, very complex. So it's a minefield. It's very problematic, but we shouldn't give up because it's such an important thing.
We are running out of time, and I have one last question. If anyone wants to grab the last few minutes to ask something, please write. Now is the time. But I noticed personally that, and I wanted to hear your opinion about this, in the kind of now time of filmmaking, because we're all in this digital and technological kind of time. A lot of filmmakers, especially very prominent ones, do always speak about the importance of shooting on film. And when we're talking about the environment, they're less concerned about the way that shooting on film is actually causing more pollution, is actually more dangerous to the environment than digital shooting. What is your opinion on that? And are you shooting on film, or are you more digital?
I haven't. Now listen, I did, because I came of age when film was still being used. I shot on it for a very long time. I haven't now, but I mean, partly it's to do with the advances. It's a great luxury to be able to shoot on film. And I think, you know, it's not like that. There are some ecological issues with you know, for example, the servers that you use to store all this information, all the rest of it, generate an amount of pollution. None of us are clean completely. Filming in and of itself, if you have to get on a plane to go to a location, and you have to drive and blah 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 and so on and so forth, you know, there can be a very big carbon footprint. There's lots of education that needs to be done about that. That's why one of the things that I did for 10 billion is I used as much library footage as possible in the construction of that. We did some days original shooting, but a lot of the images you see that are broadcast that are, you know, screen behind Stephen, are shots have already been taken by other people, and so using found footage, using library footage is obviously much more eco-conscious. The problem is this, though, that, I mean, just to widen this out, we live within a system, okay, that none of us have constructed, that has, you know, that has been developed over the last 100 years or so, which is reliant on fossil fuels. And although it's important that individual people make lifestyle changes, the big changes that are going to come need to be about policy, need to be about government, need to be about kind of trying to move our whole system across, which is why the Paris Agreement is so important. So relatively speaking, a few people, because that's all it is, shooting some stuff on film is an indulgence, but it's really not remotely as important as trying to shift away from fossil fuels, you know, towards greener energy, and towards a less destructive kind of lifestyle and a less consumerist model. So I mean, maybe it's a guilty pleasure. I haven't shot on film recently, but if I was given a chance to do it, I might take it. Maybe I'm being a big hypocrite. I don't know. I'd have to have a look and see if there was a way that quite how ecologically damaging it was.
We have two questions that might require longer answers, so I would like to ask you to try to
and
answer.
Keep them short.
Yeah.
Keep them short.
So one is, have you ever had moments in your youth where you felt your career wasn't really going anywhere, and what kept you striving forward?
Okay, I'll try and be really short. Not only moments in my youth, I have those moments every week, frankly, or if not every week, then every month. It's a very insecure profession. The only thing that can really keep you going is you have a passion for the medium. You have ups, you have downs. You know, if you really, really fall in love with filmmaking for the right reasons, then that in the end is what will keep you. It's the, you know, it's the craft.
And the last question from Georgia Mikovic. As a producer, can you share some techniques about looking for funding for a short film regarding the subject of current global pandemics? Especially as a narration film of 1 minute, including focus on medical stuff with covers. Oh, sorry, if it's too complex.
That's a long question. Listen. I'll tell you what. I'm on Instagram. You can find me, PeterWeber99. Send me a message there, or contact me through the Podgorica people who have got my email. I'm not going to hand my email out generally. Okay, you'll understand why. And I'm not a world expert on financing, but I'm happy to give you the little, you know, the information I have and try and point you in the right direction. Okay, so Instagram, PeterWeber99. I'll have a look in the sent messages there, and then I can kind of, you know, engage with you in person. Okay.
Okay, and that works. Thanks. Okay, great.
Great.
So this is about it. I'm really sorry that we don't have more time to talk, because we could talk with you like until tomorrow. But but we hope that we're gonna have the chance to really invite you to Montenegro properly and have like a full-on workshop here, because we're very. Yeah.
I'd love to do that.
So thank you very much for doing this masterclass. Thank you everyone attending and asking questions and sending them in advance. We're starting the film talks tomorrow at noon. So everyone who wants to register, you can go to podgoricafilmfestival.online and check out what we have of our programs. At 4 p.m. we have Peter's 10 billion screening, so you can watch the film, the ones who haven't seen it. And thank you, Peter, once again.
My pleasure. Thank you. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to meeting all you guys in person and some of the people who've been watching today and asking questions. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.